Okay, chapter 17, the world economy. We're going to see a little bit of an overlap from chapters 15 and 16 here, but this again is tying this time period together. It's a very difficult time period to break up for Europe into decades or even centuries. It's more of a 300-year span, and all of this quickly comes about. We're going to look at the West first outreach and maritime power towards a world economy and colonial expansion. So a lot of this was occurring even during some of the things we talked about in chapter 16 and even some of the things in chapter 15. The West first outreach, maritime power, we're going to be, already talked a little bit about this, increased contact from the 12th century. You have the Crusades, the Reconquista of Spain and Portugal, the Iberian Peninsula, familiarity with imports, changes because of the Mongols and the Ottomans, European efforts to expand, and a lot of this, all right, is going to be possible because of new technology. And it's a key to the power. So you're going to have deep draught ships, better on the ocean voyages, armaments were better, so you're having cannons, guns, the compass, map making, helping with navigation. So technology was a key to allow these things to begin. There's several maps in this PowerPoint. I would look at these to understand the navigation and who was controlling what areas. The West first outreach, you're going to have Portugal and Spain lead the pack. Prince Henry the Navigator, Portugal, just because of geographic location, furthest out to the Atlantic, they will begin their navigation with help from Prince Henry the Navigator, who will start a school for maritime trade and sea captains and shipbuilding and navigation. They will take expeditions along the African coast, and they will continue to go further and further down. 1488, past the Cape of Good Hope. 1498, Vasco da Gama reaches India. 1514, Portuguese to India and China. You'll have Columbus reach the Americas in 1492, and of course Ferdinand Magellan, 1519, will sail the world. So some key dates here. I would have an understanding of expansion and some of the areas that are getting taken over during this time period for the AP exam. Maybe not specifically who did what voyage, but at least the areas for these countries. The Treaty of Tordesillas, I hate this word, Treaty of Tordesillas, 1494, it's going to divide the lands for Spain and Portugal in the Western and Eastern hemispheres. The West first outreach, Northern European expeditions, England, Holland, France are going to take the initiative once Spain and Portugal begin. 1588, the British will defeat the Spanish Armada. This was a major upset. Spanish Armada had the strongest fleets during this time period, and pretty much from this point on, England, while they might have some rivalries with France that we saw in chapter 16, will pretty much be dominant among the seas. 1534, the French cross the Atlantic and settle in Canada. 1497, the British sail to North America. 1600s begin to colonize it. The Dutch will land in North America. They'll have a territory in New York. They eventually give it up to the British fairly easily. And they will make it over to Indonesia, where they will have a high trade in that area. Chartered companies, little government supervision. This is your British East India Company, your Dutch East India Company, and there even was a French East India Company. While not as strong, you have the British and Dutch as your main dominant ones. Again, your routes and travel into the Americas and down the coast of Africa, another map I would look at. All right, the Columbian Exchange of diseases and food, we've talked about this. Native Americans, Polynesians lack immunities, slaves imported, and so you'll have disease come in and wipe out a lot of the natives of these areas where explorers are looking for goods and gold. And of course, slaves will later become part of that triangular trade. Not initially a big source among trade. It will slowly develop into a larger source when they colonize these areas like the Caribbean for their sugar cane, and Brazil for their mining and sugar, and some tobacco, the Southeast for their tobacco. New World plants, corn, sweet potato, the regular potato. Old World, animals, horses, cattle. There's a map on the next page. I would have an understanding of it. It could really help you out in an essay. West, commercial outreach, continuity. Asian shipping in Chinese and the Japanese waters. However, this will prove to be a little difficult as far as ports go. Muslim traders along the East African coast, so Europe doesn't ever fully dominate that area. Turks in Eastern Mediterranean as well, but it's predominantly more of a European-dominated region now. Europeans remain on the coast in Africa and in Asia. Again, the Columbian Exchange. All right, imbalances in world trade. Spain and Portugal lack financial systems. This was mentioned in chapter 16 as well. And so they are losing out on their gold and silver. Another reason, not only did they not have good banking, but they didn't have good manufacturing either. And so it goes back to the whole idea of mercantilism, exports, home production, protected, dependent on area supplies for raw materials. So basically, your colonies send over the raw materials, they develop the goods and sell them back to the colonies and other places in Europe. The problem was the manufacturing wasn't occurring as well in Portugal and Spain, at least not up to the demand of it, and so other European countries were taking advantage of selling things to their colonies and to those countries. England, France, and Holland will become the dominant countries during this time period. A system of international inequality, permanent state of dependence. So a lot of these areas like the Americas, Africa, are going to become dependent on European countries because they have such a stronghold and such a development in those areas, and those raw materials will be taken out, so nothing is being developed in those areas. North America will be the exception in their revolution. They had a good foundation already started, and so when they won their independence, they're able to continue and actually become a power themselves, whereas that was not allowed in a lot of these other areas where it became more strict because of the slaves and the natives in that region. All right, how much in the world economy? Not all areas affected. East Asia was self-sufficient, specifically Japan. They were only interested for gunpowder, and then they kind of got their ports closed. China, uninterested in world economy. Again, remember, they think everybody else is barbaric. They had a little bit of an arrogance to the way that they did things, which proved to be good that they didn't want people in. Also, kind of let them have a later start on things as well. Japan, more open initially, which was just mentioned. The expansionist trend, the Mongol Empire, the Mughal Empire will be in decline. This is in India. We'll take a little bit of a look at that later on. The British and the French will move in, and they will dominate that area, even dominating the cotton trade that was in that region, so that way England's cotton would dominate. Eastern Europe exports grain to the west, so they're involved a little bit, but not nearly as much, and we'll even see Russia in chapter 18. The Americas, loosely controlled colonies. Spain is going to control the West Indies, and so you're over in the Caribbean area. 1509 will be in Panama. The Aztecs, Incas were conquered. We've looked at those in other chapters. And the whole thing is really for gold. They'll throw in the religious idea of conversions, which, not to take away from those people that were trying to convert, but that wasn't the country's main motive. It would have been the people that were trying to convert. That would have been their real reason. So your Catholic Church and even some of the Protestant churches, they had a heart for converting the people. So don't misread that. But the country as a whole, they kind of just threw that in there to make themselves look better. They were really after the gold. North America from 17th century, the French will go down Canada, the Mississippi, the Dutch and English, the Atlantic seaboard. And of course, you'll have the French and the British fighting over some of these territories. And the West Indies colonized by all three. Again, world map of the French, British, and Dutch holdings. I would look at this, even the Spanish holdings. I would look at this and have an understanding of what areas were being conquered, especially the fact that Portugal had some good holdings in Africa, and the Dutch had a good area at the Cape of Good Hope, South Africa. All right, the British and the French, North America. Different pattern from Latin America, religious refugees and land grants. So again, it looked a little bit different. This is one of the reasons why it was able to come out ahead of some of these other areas and weren't as dependent. Canada, French established the estates controlled by the state. Catholic Church was very influential. 1763, the French relinquished Canada and the Mississippi. Mississippi will eventually be taken by the British. And then, of course, Canada has their independence. Little merging of natives and immigrants, which was very different from the Americas, where there was heavy intermarriages between Europeans and the natives. Enlightenment ideas would become popular as well. So you're having more of a European influence in the Americas and more of a dependency in Central and South America, where they're mixing with the culture, and it's they're just kind of keeping major control over it. North America and Western civilizations, European-style family, European economy, and political ideas. And so that's a major difference between North America and the other areas. Africa and Asia, coastal trading stations, barriers, climate, disease, geography. Angola, Portuguese slave expeditions. This is when we'll start to see the slave trade starting to pick up a little bit. South Africa, 1652, the Dutch found Cape Town, which became a way station for the ships. Settlers move into the interior, conflicts with the natives. That's where you get the Berbers and fighting over some of that land. Asia, Spain into the Philippines. You'll have some conversions. You'll have a difference between the north and the south and how much within the Philippines, but really the only conversions will be in the Philippines. A little bit of success in Japan, but that kind of fades fairly quickly. And so really more in the Philippines. Indonesia, Dutch East India Company, also Taiwan briefly for a little bit there as well. French and British fight over control of India in 1744. War begins, and the British will win out during that. That's also over in the colonies as well. The impact on Western Europe, hostility between countries is exaggerated a little bit and blown up to a larger proportion. You have the 17 Years' War, 7 Years' War, which is considered the first global war because it's taking place on multitudes of continents. The impact of a new world order, slave trade affects Africa. So this is the beginning of slave trade, where at the beginning, early stages, very, very slow. By the 1600s, it's definitely picked up in its number. Latin America and Eastern Europe affected by slavery and serfdom as well. And here's part of your triangular trade that is occurring. And that concludes chapter 17.